coming to you from deep beneath the murky waters that lie beyond the Lake Erie shoreline. This is the Cleveland Podcast! With Fred the Mud Monster and South Bay Caesar. Find us online at facebook.com/The Cleveland Podcast or email us at theclevelandpodcast@gmail.com. Now, join us as we journey through Northeast Ohio and the city of Cleveland. La, la. Hey, Fred.
What's up, Caesar? You like salad?
Yeah, this is the third episode in a row you've asked this question.
I'm keeping tradition.
Oh, yeah. I don't like it any more or any less
there we go.
than I did in the previous two episodes.
I wonder if the next response is going to be, I will neither confirm nor deny that I like salad.
So this episode, is going to be a little more difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Episode 2, the bad.
So this is like the Clone Wars so far. This is the where it goes downhill from here.
Episode 1 was the good. Episode 2 is the bad. The bad things about Cleveland. Our first impressions of the city. Trigger warning.
Trigger.
Yeah?
There will be triggering. Maybe.
If you don't like people talking badly
about your city. Yeah.
About the city. Just go ahead and go to episode 3.
There we go. Yeah, that's a good thing.
I don't know what episode 3 is yet. But by the time this comes out, we'll probably know. So again, we go back to the, we were just talking about in the last episode, the Beyonce death threats.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Right?
We do not want to get that type of affair or business or anything like that. Keep those feelings to yourself. If you have those feelings, talk them out.
Right.
With someone that you trust.
Skip ahead to the next episode.
Yes.
You control your own fate. It's a podcast.
Yeah, right.
When I first moved here, I'd moved here for a job. And I've said this, I think, in the last 2 episodes, but it's relevant. And I bought an old pickup truck right before I moved here because my other vehicle had died. And I found myself with a debt on a vehicle that had just died. And the expenses to repair it were going to be as much as I owed on it.
Really?
So I decided to scrap my life in Columbus and move away from people I loved and moved away from the city that I loved and moved to a new city, Cleveland, for a job offer that I couldn't refuse. And when I bought an old pickup truck. I bought it for $1,500. It was a Ford F-150. I think it probably got about 8 miles to the gallon. I think the only time that I ever drove it from Columbus to Cleveland was the one time where I moved. And after that, I only use rental cars from that point going forward. Because I think by time it probably got about 8 miles to the gallon, and it was just so expensive to drive. And plus, I didn't really trust it because it was an old truck. A rental car, by the time I paid for all the gas, the rental car I'd probably break even or at least come close. And there was a lot more security in having the brand new vehicle. And I would drive that thing back and forth to work. In Parma at the time, on Ridge Road, there were all these gigantic potholes. And the more I drove down that road, the more the truck would just kind of lean. Yeah, every time I'd hit a pothole, boom, I'd just hear this giant crashing noise, and I knew it was affecting the vehicle. The longer I drove, the more it started to lean to the right. And at some point, every time I hit a pothole, I was worried that the truck was going to fall apart.
Jeez.
And there were a lot of potholes in Cleveland.
Many. That's one of the first bad things.
And there's another thing is there's a lot of salt on the roads. So if you have a vehicle, I actually started to believe that they were building cars better and then rusty cars didn't exist anymore until I moved to Cleveland. And then I'm like, no, there are a lot of rusty cars.
Well, it's also because people keep them for too long. That's kind of one of the rough things.
Right.
But not only is there salt all over the roads, there is salt on pretty much when you're walking around. Therefore, whenever you go on the public transportation, right? You'll see these salt lines everywhere across the floor, across the buses, the trains. It's kind of interesting. It looks like a postmodern painting, but
there's so many times I get home from work and there's just salt up and down my jacket.
Oh God,
it's a bad thing.
It's horrible,
but it's a good thing because then we can get around town.
True, yes.
Because, like, as we said in the good episode, the salt trucks do an amazing job.
And there's a lot of snow.
So when I went to sell my F-150, like a year later, it was done. I had saved up enough money. I had pulled myself out of that debt. I paid off all my debt, and I wanted to buy another car in cash. And I bought another old car. That's the one I sometimes drive you around in.
Oh, that's right. Ah, yes.
And it's not a thing of beauty. It's got rust, but I wanted to pay for a car in cash because I never wanted to get myself into that situation that I had back in Columbus before I moved here. And it's been a pretty good car for me so far, but it's old, 2005.
Oh, well, it's not too bad, but
yeah, and I love it. I mean, it gets me everywhere I need to go. I don't know if I love it. I love a car that gets me where I'm going.
Right.
And it does everything I need it to do. But then when so after I purchased that vehicle, then it was time to get rid of the F-150. So I found some guy on Craigslist who was willing to buy it.
The 8-mile-per-gallon truck?
Yeah. So he came over, and I think he just wanted it for scrap parts because he had another F-150.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
And he was just going to take the best parts of each truck and put them back together. Where I grew up in farm country, it's fun to have an old truck. You hear about it in country songs. And that was kind of my country song truck.
Ah, there we go.
Yeah. So when the day I went to sell it, the guy on Craigslist said, "Yeah, I'll be there like first thing in the morning on Saturday." When I walked out of the house, there was probably like 1.5 feet of snow, and this was in April.
Right.
And I completely caught me off guard. If I had known that some guy was coming over to the house and that there was 1.5 feet of snow, I would have walked out of the house and been brushing that thing off. So those are two of the things that I first noticed when I moved here. Is that the weather is brutal.
It is tough.
The snow lasts so long. It lasts into April, and I've heard it lasts into May sometimes. And I would get to the point where I remember that first year, that same year, I just remember walking out every morning and it's snowing. Snowing. I don't know if I counted, but I think it was 2 weeks in a row where every morning I walked out and I had to brush my vehicle off.
Well, not only the fact that it's snowing so much, it's also so cold. This is the first time I'd ever had classes canceled because of weather. Now, unfortunately, everyone's like, yeah, that's amazing. We have classes canceled. Then there's me. All my classes start after 12. And they're like, well, all classes are closed until 12 p.m. And I'm like, oh, all my classes are after 12. So I'm sitting there like, oh, this is kind of disappointing. But the weather is supposed to be -30.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, I guess it can't be that bad. And then I walked out in that weather, and it is so brutal. It is so cold. It takes you 2 minutes to realize that you have done screwed up in regards to the cold. So if it's not snowing, it could be brutally cold. However, it's gotten better. I remember the first time I was here, my first winter here was really bad, really tough. But since then, it's been not too bad. But this past winter was pretty rough for me. Second worst for me. But it's been not too bad.
Again, as we talked about in the last episode, when I lived in Nashville, there was a threat of snow. Snow was coming at the end of the day. And I think it actually did hit. In Nashville, when it snows, at least when I lived there, if it snows, it doesn't stay there very long. It doesn't stay on the ground very long. It usually just kind of comes down and melts. And I was getting towards the end of the day and the work day, and somebody asked me, "Are you going to go home?" Because everybody in the entire building had left, and we got paid hourly, so it wasn't like I was gonna make money if I went home. So and plus I had work to do, and everybody was leaving, walking out the door, and one of the ladies walks up to my office and says, "Are you going home?" And I'm like, "Why would I go home?"
Right.
She's like, "Well, it's supposed to snow." I'm like, I don't. I've driven in snow my whole life. Why would I, go home because it's supposed to snow? And it was kind of a.
This is the coworkers taking advantage. They're like, "Ooh, we get to get out of work early."
Well, one of the things that she and I said, I don't know why you guys are going home. It's kind of silly. She said, "Think about it this way. Do you want me on the road?"
That's funny.
And I thought about it, and I'm like, "Go home."
That is funny. That's hilarious. I remember actually, this was back home in Baltimore when it was a really bad ice storm. And I remember I was walking home. And I remember I seeing this car with the wheels spinning.
Yeah.
The car's not even moving. And I remember this like a terrifying sight to me because I'm like, man, that, like ice, like, you know, the cars is not moving at all. And all the Maryland drivers are panicking. And I remember there was another ice storm a couple years later where literally there were cars stuck and like toppled over on the road because people didn't know how to drive in ice. And then I came here. It seems like people just go drive right through the ice like, oh, just another normal day on the roads, I suppose. You know, it's really just a huge difference.
Right.
I mean, for me, it's like I'm used to people who could drive in snow because my family comes from the north, so they're like, oh, snow, this is nothing. But, you know, it's still fun to see that. But at the same time, there are still moments where you go, even in Cleveland, you go, I'm not sure if that's how you're supposed to drive in the snow. You could tell those are people from they're imports coming from other parts of the country in the world. And you can't blame them, but you're like, oh, in the moment, you're like, you got to be kidding.
You know, and that's another thing. I think people are probably a little more unhealthy here because of the long winters.
Oh, yes.
I mean, a couple of things. I don't think people are as concerned about health, about running, because you can't. I mean, some people still run throughout the winter.
They try.
But when it's icy on the ground, you know, I remember when I lived in Nashville, I sat down for dinner with a girl who was in a band, which found some low-level success. And somebody asked her, aren't you going to eat? And she's like, no, my trainer and my record label would kill me if I had the food at this restaurant. Because fitness and looking good for music videos and things like that were so important. I've never heard anybody in Cleveland ever say, I'm not going to eat that.
My response would be, oh, that's great. More food for me. I don't care, because I have been in a photo contest and almost won as a little baby. Like, I was like, I was a very cute little child.
Yeah, there's a picture?
Oh, yeah. It's actually my mother's study, you know, back home. And it was like me, like this, like, you know, like onesie. And I remember just like, I'm in the sand. I'm just staring up very adorably. I was like in the top 20.
I think we can post that.
We could post that, just like little me, 2-year-old me, just staring up. I actually remember that because I remember like these photographers. I'm like, and they were just like, "Oh, can you angle this here, move that there?" I'm like, "Why are you telling me to do this? This is so dumb." I was like, 2-year-old me was tired. I was like, I just want to play with my toys and go home, eat some ice cream. But I think it's, you ever see like the movie, like you talking about the story of, oh, I can't really eat. Do you remember that? Do you ever seen that scene in one of the scary movies where there's like like they do a parody of the Black Swan movie?
No, I haven't seen that.
You know, have you seen the Black Swan?
No, I haven't seen that either.
The Black Swan's like the ballet movie with like Natalie Portman and how it's like she's trying to perfect the little dance.
Okay.
And basically, you know, they're doing a parody of that, and then they finish the scene, and the lady goes, "Oh, so hungry." And she opens up, and it's just a single Cheerio. And the other ballet looks at her like, are you freaking kidding me? You know, it's just like you think about those things, you go, the standard's so high. But that's kind of one of the weird things, too. And I guess it's like a pro and a con, because we're great. This city's so great at food because that's all we can do during the winter is work and cook and then eat. That's kind of the motto. I guess you could say in a way.
I think around here people are always telling me, eat this.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's just the people I know or if it's like local culture, but people are always like, just eat more. I used to have a roommate who was a Filipino lady, and she would just always, that's something that she would always say every time I go home. When I got home, she would make some ribs or something like, and I'm like, nope, I'm on a diet.
And then you go, oh man, these are so finger licking good, and you go, oh my god, I broke the diet.
But she wouldn't stop. She'd be like, eat more.
That's like my Grammy.
So maybe that's not Cleveland culture as much as it is Filipino culture.
Well, I think it's winter culture, because it's also the idea of like, you know, this is the science behind it. We eat more because it's like, as mammals, there's a natural phase of hibernation.
Right.
And we totally break that code.
Right.
Because we go, oh, well, why not? We're just going to go to the store instead. You know, this is why people get more tired. This is why people get more depressed, because we're out of that rhythm. I'm not saying sleep for 3 months during the winter and just go, hi, boss, I'm back. That wouldn't be good. But, you know, but again, there's also, you have to eat a lot because you're trying to develop that winter body in order to sleep through the entire time.
Right. And I'm one of those people who are seasonally affected. So if seasonal affective disorder is a downside to your life, it's going to be worse here than it is somewhere else.
Right.
Like, if you're in Miami, you got to look good, right? South Beach diet,
You're right. We just want to eat ribs.
And even when I lived in the South, just style was more important. And I have this thing where if I don't wear a winter hat when it's cold outside, I'll get sick very easily.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm always wearing winter hats. And even when I lived in Columbus, I'd wear a winter hat. Like I'd have hat hair all day.
Right.
So I'd go into a restaurant or something like to meet my friends, and people would be like, take off your hat. You look like a homeless person.
Actually, it's funny that I was sleeping on one of the benches for the RTA when I was in undergrad.
Yeah.
Because I was really tired. It was after like a somewhat long shift for the Great Lakes Science Center. And then I remember I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, oh, it'll be fine. And then I'm woken up by a police officer like, sir. I'm like, hi, what's going on? The police officer goes, you have anywhere to go tonight, sir? And I'm like, I pulled out like my student ID, and I'm going to do it right here. I'm going to imitate what I did. And this was so pompous of me. I was a freshman, so I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
I pull out my student ID. I smack it in the officer's hand. I go, you think I don't have somewhere to go? And he looks at it. It's like, oh, I'm sorry. It's just that, you have a hole in your hat. You have mud on your pants.
Because you are the mud monster. And you always have mud.
Exactly. It's like you have dirt here. You have a little bit of a hole in your jacket. And so then I look down and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got all this stuff. And I profusely apologize for my pompous behavior. But it was kind of rough. Like when I wake up from a nap, I could be a little bit nasty.
A little bit cranky?
A little bit cranky. Like, just I think it's everybody.
Right.
But, but that was just like, it was just one of those weird moments where, it's just like, really? Like, but that actually leads to another, like, something that's kind of rough. The Cleveland police are not the greatest entity in the world.
What?
This is the thing, I run in a lot of circles where there's discussion of, like, police brutality and all that stuff. Like, look at the Tamir Rice incident, right? We have people who, we have officers who kind of see someone that's not like them, and the response is, you're not automatically a criminal. Or, like, you have more of a propensity towards crime. And that's in part due to training, and, and that's also, like, that leads to a whole bigger question about police training and how it's done. But, the Cleveland police can be a little bit rough from what I heard. And I only have had one really somewhat weird experience with the Cleveland police where I got a ticket for not bringing not buying a pass.
Right.
And the funny thing was, I was sitting next to this other guy. We were both caught without a pass. This guy was out on a warrant, so they had put him in handcuffs and took him away in the car. Then there's me. All right, here's your fee. Pay it to Tower City, otherwise you'll be sent. You'll have a summons to court. I'm like, $25? I'm gonna die. So I picked up I literally picked up all the change from my room. Like, I went change hunting. I found quarters, nickels, dimes, and I got enough for $25. I put it in front of the RTA person. They're like, "Are you serious? You want me to count this?" I'm like, "What? I found it in my room."
Well, I've never had too much of a problem, but maybe that's because of where I live.
It's possible, but it's also, racial profiling and, identity and, all that good stuff. It's really tricky.
So in Cleveland, I was talking about how down in Columbus I'd wear hats and people would kind of yell at me because it's not a very classy thing to do. When I got to Cleveland, I noticed that other people are doing it too. Like, you can walk into a restaurant and people are just kind of wearing hats. And I thought, oh, my people, the hat-wearing people.
Yeah, right.
The hat-wearing people at a semi-decent restaurant.
You go in, you ever have, like, the SNL skit with, like, the cones, right? The cone heads, and they go, "Hello, my name's Caesar. I want to say you are my people. I want to take over the world with our winter-wearing hats."
So I guess that's a bad thing in a way, but for me it's great because I need to wear the hat.
Right.
If I wear the hat and I go into the restaurant and I have two choices. I can take the hat off and like have horrible hat hair, or I could keep the hat on and I could stay warm and not be sick.
Well, the mud on my head keeps my hair so well preserved that when I take off my hats, my hair comes out pristine and clean. It's not really a hat head; it's just sexy hat hair.
I remember when I first moved here, I was online asking people, what's all that horrible smell? Oh. There's so many smells in the city, like bad smells. And I think the worst one is the sewage treatment plant over by Edgewater Beach.
Yeah.
Nothing like going down to like a beautiful beach when the sun's setting or when you're playing and sports or whatever.
Oh, sulfur. Oh, that's not sulfur.
That's the
sewage being treated.
Yeah, and if the wind is blowing towards the west from the sewage treatment plant, you're just going to be overwhelmed with the
stench.
The smell of raw sewage. Ugh. Which is another thing. Sometimes raw sewage actually overflows
sometimes
into Lake Erie.
Which is you ever hear about the whole thing about the green toxic sludge?
No.
Yeah, that was actually when I first came here. There was talk about that. Like, you couldn't swim in the lake because it was toxic. Because of, like, the sewage was mixing in. It was creating, like, a toxic little thing.
Okay.
You had to clear it up for a couple months.
Yeah.
But I think for me, my smells in terms of, like, this city has many different smells, and some are really not good.
Right.
When you're riding on public transportation, you'll ride into the fact that you're going to have a couple of people who are homeless that pretty much try and sleep on the bus, right?
Right.
And Cleveland, this is one of those things too. Cleveland actually is quite the homeless issue, as I do believe as the city has a much higher rate of poverty than the national average, and therefore when you get people who they don't really they're not necessarily taking a shower or they don't have access to a shower, so you get some pretty interesting smelling individuals. And I remember the worst experience was someone who was a little bit off his rocker. I remember I was sitting in the bus and I see this man kind of have this big, weird grin.
Yeah.
Of like, I just did something horrible.
Oh.
And he leaves.
Oh no.
And there's certain stains on the seat.
Oh.
And
number 1 or number 2?
Oh, this is number 2.
Oh.
This is not small either, so I'm just gagging. And this poor gentleman goes up and picks it up with like a wiper.
That's not a stain. It's
a thing.
Yeah.
It's the emoji. It doesn't look too good. And this poor guy picks it up and he throws it away, and I'm like, why would you throw it away? Just take the bucket, put it outside. That's the end of it. I felt so bad for the gentleman. He's like, well, it happens. I'm like, yeah, when someone doesn't take an entire dump on a seat. But, you get some of that sometimes. Someone kind of like doesn't really wipe right and, they don't wash well enough.
Oh,
so
no.
you get some smells.
In addition to the individual people who do bad things, which I wouldn't say I would say you probably have those weird people in every city.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But there's some of the factories put off some weird smells too.
They do.
I was online and I was asking about what's that smell. I think somebody told me that's like a sulfur discharge from the steel yard.
Yeah, right.
The steel yard can be pretty smelly at times, and so if you're living near that neighborhood, it's kind of stinky, and you drive through. It can be stinky on your way around. And I've somewhere up by West 130th, I used to drive through town, and I thought, what's that? Is there something? There's like a moldy towel in my vehicle somewhere, and then it would go away, and I started to realize, there's something around in this neighborhood, and I still don't know
what it was,
what created it, or where it was to this day. And I haven't smelled it as much recently. I don't know if it
was a smelly ghost.
Yeah, a smelly, moldy ghost who always hung out at West 130th.
That's our third.
Near 71.
That's our third co-host that we're going to bring onto the podcast.
Smelly ghost.
smelly, moldy ghost.
Yeah.
Oh, how's it doing?
All right, I think this is kind of the point where we usually take a break.
Yep.
All right, we'll be right back.
Hello, this is Fred, the Monster. Be sure to check out the episode notes for today's show. Go to the photo albums at Facebook.com/The Cleveland Podcast and find the album with the same name as this episode. We'll be sharing photos as well as any additional information that might be relevant to each new show. That way, you'll have something visual to reference as you listen and follow along. If you enjoy the show, be sure to like us and share. See you on the interwebs. We are back.
We're back. One of the things that I first noticed when I first moved here, and I drive a lot more often than you do, since
because I don't got no car.
Right. So one of the first things that I noticed when I moved to the city was that there were 60. The maximum speed limit in Cuyahoga County is about 60 miles per hour.
Oh, really?
Right. I think the exception is the paid toll road, Interstate 80, and I think it's 70 there. But everywhere else in the city, the speed limits kind of tend to be 60 miles per hour and 35 miles per hour. And I noticed that it was really hard to adjust to that when you're from other cities where the speed limit
could be higher. Yeah,
it seems like such a random number to make everything 60. I think in other cities they kind of do like little
they vary.
Right, they adjust. Like this area needs to be 70 because it's pretty safe, and this other area needs to be 45 because it's kind of in between. There's a lot of variance. Here in Cleveland, it just seems to be a lot of 60 miles per hour, and it seems to be a lot of 35 miles per hour. You have to get used to that. It's easy to speed at first when you first move here. And one of the things that I find myself doing when I leave Cuyahoga County is that all of a sudden the speed limit's 65 miles per hour, 70 miles per hour, and all of a sudden I notice people tailgating me. I was like, oh no, I must have left Cuyahoga County.
But you're like, I'm moving slow. And everyone goes, what are you doing, a Sunday morning drive?
One of the other things is that, not all the neighborhoods here have like highways going to them. And I think a lot of people like their neighborhoods insulated from the outside world. I still haven't pinpointed what it is. I still don't have an understanding, and I've been here for a while now. I don't have an understanding of what the east side people are supposed to be like compared to what the west side people are supposed to be like.
I think like west side's been kind of like more of like suburbia.
Yeah.
Kind of like taking the east side. I know people who embody this. I think the east and west also has a little bit of a racial tinge too.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot, I think the population distribution, the demographic changes quite a bit. Like there's a lot of like, historically black neighborhoods that exist on the east side, and then you have like more white because of there's kind of like it's moving away from the city a little bit.
Right.
So that's like the kind of like that divide a little bit that we talk about in the city. And so there's that. I mean, I know people from the east side that have never gone to the west side, not once. And it's really, and you think, really, after all these years, like they're 20, 30 years living in a city, sometimes more, and they go, not once did they go on the west. And
we were talking earlier that I knew somebody who lived in Parma and didn't ever want to leave.
Right.
She was happy just being there.
Right.
And I've known people who are happy in Lakewood, and they don't. And anytime something's happening on the other side of town, they're not going.
Right.
I know people on the east side who don't want to go to the west side or to Parma. There's three different sides of town that are pretty insulated from each other, and I probably the lack of highways probably
is the real killer.
I think Parma is a good example. You can get inside of Parma and it's 35 miles per hour,
right,
and then the stoplight, and then wait for the stoplight, go another block, another stoplight, 35 miles per hour. Just it takes for.
Right.
I mean, it's something that if there were a highway going through it, you could get from one side to the other in probably 10 minutes.
And I think it's also a political divide as well, because the way the city, there's these things called wards. And, there's like about 17, 18 wards within the city of Cleveland, and you have like the west side wards and the east side wards. And the east side wards are kind of like known for more like fierce ideas because they're like, hey, I'm fighting for my neighborhood. Where, you have some of the west side wards, and they're kind of like more like, hey, like, I'm trying to uphold the success of our wards and to continue the development of them. And so when we have that contrast, I think that further decreases that divide because the east side feels like it's always scrapping to survive, and and that's kind of like the city. That's kind of the side that's in some ways a little bit more like has more history, I think, than something than on the west. I think a lot of the historical buildings and like its former glory compared to the now recently developing west side, which in itself has quite a bit of history as well, but the east side has quite a bit of just formerly known history and the place where the Indians were. They used to be much more located in like the Huff area, things of that nature that give the east side like, hey, like, we want to go back to the glory days where the east side had more prominence. Hence, I think that continues to divide as well.
I mean, if you have a friend on the west side and you are on the east side or Parma or whatever, as we talked about in the pilot episode, this city is very sprawly. Is that a word? Sprawly?
It's sprawling.
It's sprawling. You may have to drive 45 minutes to see your friend.
It is, yeah, and it's hard.
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't have a car, I've been able to get as far as Westlake, no problem.
Yeah.
Because I have many magical ways of getting everywhere.
And some people are as far as Akron, which is 30, 40, 50 minutes away.
Right, which is not easy to get to for me.
Also, there's traffic ticket cameras. Is seen mostly in East Cleveland, and also in Lindale. East Cleveland's on the east side. East Cleveland's its own city. It's not the east side of Cleveland. It's its own city.
Right.
And then Lindale, which is if you're driving from Lakewood to maybe like Brooklyn, Lindale's in the middle. Kind of close to the zoo. Mm-hmm. And they just they have these traffic cameras where they catch speeders, and people know to avoid those areas.
Right, but it's also because certain neighborhoods have really expensive ticket fees. I think that, like, I know certain cities that have, or certain suburbs of Cleveland that have, like, unusually high prices compared to certain other parts. But basically, the gist of this is that we like to drive on the Autobahn, where we could just go at limitless speed, oh, I said speeds, oh dear. Limitless speeds, where we can just go, yeah, that's a little bit safer. It's actually kind of interesting. You ever see like some of the things about like faster highways versus slower ones?
No.
They say that technically, everyone thinks, if we go faster, there's more of a chance to crash. Turns out that is not the case. At least, from the studies they've made that like sometimes when you drive faster, less of a case for a traffic incident.
Really?
Because most traffic incidents happen, I think, within a couple miles of the home. Yeah. So you're like, this is a nice day. I get to go home, see my significant other, see my children, blah, 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 blah. You just think about other things, and all of a sudden, bam!
Yeah.
You get T-boned, and all of a sudden, your life changed forever. Maybe.
Well, if all those accidents happen so close to home, stay away from home. Right?
Like, just sleep at the bar.
Well, then definitely.
Sleep on the pool table.
Sounds pretty nice. Until somebody wants to play games.
Let's go. Hit the 8-ball.
There's some wacky intersections here.
There are.
A lot of roundabouts. A lot of, I think I tried to say this in the first pilot episode, and I totally screwed it up. A lot of 5-6-way intersections that are just kind of dangerous.
Right. And sometimes you don't know where you're turning. Like, you ever see some of the stuff in Coventry and, like, Cleveland Heights.
Right.
Where, the road, like, divides in two parts, and you don't know when the road starts again. Where you're just going, wait, that street was not that street just a minute ago. Now I'm on this street. And then with the 5-6-way roads, it's so hard to know, okay, this is my right turn. This is this exact turn. I've gotten lost that way so many times, taking that wrong turn because there's so many to pick from.
I've learned since we started doing this podcast how quiet I am. Mm-hmm. And I guess the last place I lived, kind of a quiet place where I was at. So when I moved here, people are a lot louder than what I'm used to. And that was one of the first things I noticed. However,
Oh, that was a little bit loud.
However,
right,
when the I think it was the American League playoff game, when Boston fans came into Cleveland, it was still when I was pretty new here, and I was thinking, oh, Cleveland people are so loud. When those Boston fans came in,
oh, there's nothing to compare.
That's like all of a sudden Cleveland people seem a little bit quieter.
That's half of my heritage. Boston, they're so loud. You can hear them a mile away. Whenever talking about sports, oh man, it's like the Pats, the Bruins, the Red Sox, the Celtics. They all are like, man, look at them, Boston, Boston.
So loud. I'm in the same room as you.
Yes, please
stop yelling.
Yes, but Cleveland people can get that way too.
I realize that I'm a very quiet person.
And you're doing a podcast. This is really ironic.
It's funny. I'm a very much an introvert. So,
but you're doing a podcast.
Right. Like, I don't really enjoy talking to people.
But you're doing a podcast. I'm just going to slam this home.
I think we talked a little bit about this in the pilot episode. Bad neighborhoods are close to good neighborhoods.
It's a crazy variance. You can go from one to the other like that.
And there are a lot of condemned homes. A lot of homes without windows, and then they're just kind of falling apart.
Right.
I mean, there are certain sections of the city where you can go in, and I guess I think of Detroit. It kind of is Detroit-esque, where there's just one torn down, or there's a lot of yards where they tear them down.
Right.
But then there are other sections where you can look down an entire street, and there's just a street of houses with no windows, and you can tell nobody's lived in them
for a long time. But I think that's also this is a little bit of history here. When we think about some of the red line practices of Cleveland, this is how you get the cities to be so segregated, because you go, well, if you put the public houses over in certain neighborhoods, then you keep the people in those certain neighborhoods, and that kind of leads to the overall degradation of the value of homes around the area. And further, those homes, when people move out, sometimes and more often or not, there's been this like history of white flight where, neighborhoods like Glenville, where there's numerous boarded up houses in that neighborhood. That's a result of, when minorities, non-whites, started to move into those neighborhoods because they were making money, and now they're making it good, and all of a sudden they move in, and then all of a sudden because certain white folks did not want to associate with those who are non-white, they moved out, and all of a sudden the value drops because now you go, oh, you can't really afford those homes though. Like you could afford the lower end, but now it's hard to afford the upper end, and therefore it's hard to find people who can take those homes, and therefore the bank starts selling riskier loans to those who cannot necessarily pay them. Therefore the defaults are faster when defaulting on the loans, and then all of a sudden you go through such a quick change of owners that eventually that house loses so much value. And further, things like the crack epidemic, which really hit the city very hard in the 80s. It really changes quite a few. In those neighborhoods where, crack was more prevalent, it would tear those cities apart, or tear those houses apart.
Have you ever been to Transportation Boulevard?
Heard of it, but I probably have traversed it at some point, but
it's kind of a strange thing. They built a Walmart and a couple of different stores and a Giant Eagle on top of a former trash dump. And apparently there was methane coming up into the store.
Oh, jeez.
And so I haven't figured the story out specifically, but I think it's maybe like a little segment we could do in the future.
Yeah.
If somebody who knows a lot about that history, wants to talk with us about it, or if we can find some more research. But there's an entire row of, the only one that's left is the Giant Eagle. And there's an Applebee's.
Right.
But of the big box stores that were there, they just had one next to another, next to another, next to another, like you would find in other cities.
Right.
But these were all closed down, other than the Giant Eagle.
Right, because of the methane, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how long it lasted, but it's just one of those things where it's like, how did this happen?
Right.
And then you hear the story.
But actually, that leads into another thing that we could talk about, which is there is a little bit of a lack of economic development. When we think about Cleveland historically has been a city of manufacturing. Cleveland has been that way for a long time. It's been a big shipping town. It's been a big iron melting, steel making town for a long, long time. And then when you start to outsource some of that production to other countries, and it starts to become more expensive to make within the United States, you start to lose those businesses, and you lose so many jobs from the factories. Like, look at Lordstown. They're closing down that plant for, I think it's Toyota or GM. It's like a huge car plant. You know which one I'm talking about. Hold on. Let me find what the exact...
Where's Lordstown at?
Lordstown, I think, is... Ooh, I do not want to mess this up. So we're going to look it up. But the whole point of that is, what's happening in Lordstown now is similar to what happened in Cleveland. Like, the big businesses have moved out in order to outsource material, and therefore local businesses suffer. Like, you go to Tower City, you see so many empty lots. When you go to the arcade, which is an historic mall for the city of Cleveland, which has great donuts, by the way, which I love to eat. I know the owner. Nice guy. But, you know, in the arcade, almost half of the arcade doesn't even have stores, or like storefronts. Like, there's people just can't afford, there's not much business, like local business. I mean, yes, it's growing and developing, and we've developed, and there's been great progress, but there's still much more to be done. And there's definitely a sense of entrepreneurship in the city, but it's just trickier because it's, you know, there's more complicated rules, and the fact is that there's also just, this is a city it's tough because the winter and the weather takes a big chunk out of a business because people don't want to go outside and go shopping when they're about to freeze. Let's see. Lordstown is in Trumbull County, so that's actually really far down. Yeah, Trumbull County. That's really to the east, like pretty much right up to the Pennsylvania line. Let's see. Where's the plant? GM plant. Yeah, like this was a huge plant with like so many people were working, and then it got closed. I mean, you're talking about thousands of jobs lost, and that was the same case for Cleveland decades earlier. So now you have a lot of people who were working factory jobs, and one of the big issues is many of those factory workers did not have the greatest education to go into another job that was non-factory related. In fact, I think it's a lot. In fact, the amount of people who have not finished high school is a little bit larger than the national average within the city of Cleveland, and as a result, the amount of jobs one can get into is quite limited.
There's a lot of blue-collar work ethic here.
Absolutely. And that's actually a positive, you know?
I think sometimes you get into neighborhoods, you know, and some of the other towns that I've lived in, you kind of know when you're in the good neighborhood and kind of you know when you're in the bad neighborhood.
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I'm from being from Baltimore, that's more of a blue-collar town than anything else. You know, we're very similar to Cleveland. You know, factory city on the rock. We're trying to rebuild. So when I actually go through some of the rough neighborhoods, sometimes I go, you know, that's not too bad. Like, I went through East Cleveland recently, and I go, you know, most people go, oh man, it's not the best place to be. I go, you know what? This is actually not too bad. This is kind of pleasant outside of the potholes and some of the boarded up houses. But you go, you know, if you're from like a blue collar town where, you know, things like that happen, you get used to it.
I think there are a lot of neighborhoods on the west side where you're just kind of driving through and it's like, is this a good neighborhood? Is this a bad neighborhood?
Don't know.
I don't know.
Right.
Maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just a neighborhood.
Yeah, it's just middle class, like very decisively middle class.
There's a steel yard right in the middle of the city.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good that there's that business there.
But again, the sulfur.
Right. It's kind of cool to see the fire shooting out of the smokestacks.
Yeah.
And visually it's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what the city was built on.
Yeah, absolutely. The problem is it's not as much now.
The Cuyahoga River goes right straight through the steel yard, which is, you know,
makes sense.
And then downtown.
Right.
And so the shipping lanes are going through all those neighborhoods. Dead Man's Curve. You'll be driving down Interstate 90 through downtown, and everybody's driving like 60 miles per hour.
Here we go again with that.
All of a sudden, it comes to like this giant curve, and everybody has to slow down to like a ridiculously slow speed so that people don't crash into each other.
And let me guess, they crash into each other.
I don't think they do it as much anymore. They have these rumble strips where it's like...
Oh, I see. Well, I guess that's the reason why it's called Dead Man's Curve.
Yeah, and probably the last most obvious bad thing about the city, or in the way that it needs to be improved. There's a lot of segregation here.
One of the most segregated cities in the country.
Yeah. I found this online, the Huffington Post, and depending on which website you look at, you get different statistics. But this Huffington Post article, and I've mentioned this before, was the article that said that Cleveland is the most segregated city in the United States. And the percentage of population living in segregated areas is 55.1%, according to them.
Right.
The black poverty rate is 33.6. The white poverty rate is 9.3. The black unemployment rate is 20.2. The white unemployment rate is 5.4.
When we think about just think about that. The 33% to what? 9%, right? Was it 23?
For which one was it?
The
white poverty rate?
The poverty rate, yeah.
For white, it was 9.3, and for black, it was 20.2.
20.2. That's insane to think about. But I think it's also about exposure to various different opportunities, and there it kind of shows that further west and east divide, where you get quite a few historically black neighborhoods in the east and more white neighborhoods in the west. And I think one of the things is there's quite a few jobs that go outside of the city, and for so many, for someone who lives in Lakewood who's a white person, they there might be some inherent things that give them somewhat of an advantage, and they're going to more likely have a car and they'll be able to drive out. For those who are African American and more inclined to, unfortunately, rates of poverty or to be falling under the poverty line, you're going to be more likely to take the bus, and the bus can't take you everywhere and get you on time. Like there's this person who was late for their doctor's appointment on the Health Line just a couple days ago. I met this person. He's like, man, I'm going to be late by almost an hour. You think a doctor's appointment, and you have to go all the way to Lakewood. I'm like, why Lakewood? But it's just whoever can take them in. It's insane to think that happens. But I think the biggest, I guess, a suggestion of improvement from two white guys, which is very, very, very ironic, is when we consider the breakdown of the city. I think there's often a misrepresentation at the political level in terms of who gets the money and who gets the power. As a friend of mine who's a city councilman here said, it's all about the political money. Who gets the money during the campaign? That campaign money can eventually become the key to getting money into your neighborhood. So I think one of the big things is you have to kind of alter how the city politics occur, and you have to not have the neighborhood depend on the politicians to necessarily guide the city. It's kind of to become more of a self-reliance type of effect, where the rates can then go down, where business can be created from within, and when pooling the finances together, it's definitely possible to pull many people, particularly African Americans, in the city out of the poverty line, and start to develop a more middle class, I guess, dynamic.
So ultimately, there's we've gone over the good, we've gone over the bad. Mm-hmm. I think from a fairly subjective point of view on both sides. Mm-hmm. Some people love living here,
like us.
Yeah. As we've talked about in the pilot episode, all cities have pros and cons. If you like affordability, this is a great
place.
This is a great place.
Well, if you don't like, if you're looking for more integration, may not be the place to be.
If you don't like 9 months long cold weather,
may not be the place to be. Yeah. Well, if you love great food and still like great sports, this is the place to be. Like many cities, there are good and bad, good and evil, many aspects of a city, the underbelly, that may not be so good to look at. But in the end, it's still a city that we love. It's a city we live in. It's a city that people do prosper in, but also people have struggle in. In the end, it is up to us to decide whether the good or bad outweighs itself, whether good outweighs the bad in the city or the bad outweighs the good. It is up to you to make that decision. our wonderful, beautiful audience. With that being said, this is the truth about Cleveland. And
according to us.
But we take great pride in all of it, in terms of its positives and what needs to be improved. And that is our episode.
Later.
It's a thing.
Yeah.
It's the emoji, you know. It doesn't look too good. You know?